What's going on YouTube? In today's video we're going to be going over how to install a MICROSQUIRT V3 on an LH 2.2 Volvo 240. So this is probably not going to be the most interesting video I've ever made unless you are doing this install with the MICROSQUIRT on the Volvo 240. It's going to be very informational, it'll probably be very long, but I could not find a single good resource where all the information was in one place to do a MICROSQUIRT ECU on a Volvo 240. Now I'm sure a lot of the information in this video is going to carry over to other cars, probably to LH 2.4 and other 240 models that have different ignition systems, but I'm going to be showing you exactly what I did and how you can change it and everything you're going to need. It's going to be all encompassing, mostly of just the physical part, so all of the wiring, how I mounted everything, what sensors you need to buy, what sensors are already in the car, yeah. All that together, one video. Don't have to sort through forums and old YouTube videos from 9 years ago because I did it all for you. So first things first, I'm gonna kind of go in depth and detail with everything you need. This will probably be a long list. Once you've watched through it once and you've ordered everything or put it all in your cart, you won't really need to go back to it. So first thing you're gonna need is the ECU itself. You're going to need the MICROSQUIRT V3 ECU. That is what I use for this build. Just when you're watching this video, you also either purchase this ECU and or are planning on for your build. Second, wiring. You're going to need a pigtail harness, which you can buy usually with the ECU. The website I bought the ECU offered the pigtail with it. It's a $30 8-foot ECU pigtail. It's not worth making your own pigtail or wiring harness. Just use this as a basis. It's much easier to build everything off of this. And then I also bought, not necessarily needed, but I bought a trailer wiring harness kit. Comes with, I think, like 6 different colors of wire. That wasn't super expensive, just got that off Amazon, and it definitely helped running power wires and ground wires just throughout the build, and it's wire I'll use for other projects down the road. Concerning the, I guess, basic setup of the ECU, you're going to need a fuse block. I used a fuse block which looks like this. You are not going to need anything super fancy. I've seen other people use different fuse blocks for different MICROSQUIRT and MegaSquirt builds. Mine is super simple and it is working for me. I have no problems with it, and there are extra slots that I have in case I want to add anything, fog lights, whatever in the future. You are going to need 2 relays, one for your fuel pump, one for your main relay, which is pretty much everything else. Mine look like this. They are the standard, I think it's like 87, 86, 35, 36, whatever the numbers are, relays, just 12 volt, super standard. Mine are cool and clear. You don't need these, you can get black ones. Very standard, nothing special about them. Concerning little connectors, I used a lot of heat shrink. I used a lot of male-female connectors. I used a lot of butt connectors. I used a lot of spade connectors. Just little general things like that for wiring. If you've wired anything before in a car, you should know basic wiring practice. There are a lot of other videos out there for good wiring practice. I'm not going to cover that in this video because that's not what this is about. Next, you're going to need a bunch of sensors for the car. Some of them are already in, which is nice. The first one that you're going to need is a Hall effect sensor and a tooth wheel to go with the sensor. If you don't know how a Hall effect sensor works, go Google it. There's a short video out there which will explain it. But you're going to need a Hall sensor. I got mine from DIY Auto Tune. It is this sensor right here. I also got a 36-1 toothed gear from DIY Auto Tune, and that is what I used for the RPM input for this engine. The kit from DIY Auto Tune is extremely easy to install. I got it right the first time, no problems. I finished with a bunch of stuff. Some people use the distributor Hall sensor, which comes in this car. Some of the models of the 240 have the Hall sensor on the top of the bell housing on the transmission. This one does not. So to avoid all that and make it as simple as possible, get that sensor I just mentioned from DIY Auto Tune, get that tooth gear. I'll show you how I installed it later. That's what you're going to need for your RPM signal input. The next sensor you're going to need is a MAP sensor, a manifold absolute pressure sensor. I did not use the MAF sensor which came with the car, the mass airflow. I ended up turbocharging this car, which is completely separate, so I removed my MAF sensor. If you want to go out there and learn how to dig through forums a little bit and use your MAF sensor so you don't have to buy a MAP sensor, you can do that, but wiring the MAP sensor is very easy. I had no problems with it. I will show you how to do what I did there in a second. But I definitely recommend getting the GM 3-bar map sensor, also on DIY Autotune. Pretty much all the sensors I got for this car, DIY Autotune, not sponsored, but they have everything and they have nice support systems for it, and go through how to install all the sensors that they sell and why you need them for your build. The next sensor I had to buy, an intake air temperature sensor. Does exactly what you think it does, reads the temperature of the intake air. Assuming you're installing this on a stock 240, not turbocharged like my car, you just gotta drill a hole, put a bung for it. But this is another GM sensor, again, not super expensive, got it on DIY Autotune. Extremely easy to wire. You're going to need the GM intake air temperature sensor. You are also going to need a wideband O2 sensor. Now, there's a lot of discussion on the best O2 sensor. There's a large range of prices you can spend on an O2 sensor, from about like $45 up to like $200. I got one somewhere in the middle, a little bit more expensive. I got one that was about $130 to $150, and I got that sensor from AEM. It is an AEM O2 wideband sensor. It comes with a gauge and it comes with the Bosch sensor itself. I can't remember the number code for the Bosch sensor, but that's not important. That's the O2 sensor I used. Get a quality one. You don't necessarily need a gauge with the O2 sensor separate from the controller. I recommend just getting one though, and it's nice that it already comes in a kit and it's a fair price for a nice gauge and the sensor and all the wiring instructions with it. Next sensor you're going to need is not really a sensor. It is this Bosch ignition module. You're going to need it for your ignition system. It is from a newer Volvo and a few other cars, but it's super easy to wire, and I don't know why it works, but I have it wired in my car exactly how the wiring diagram said, and it works. So buy one. You're gonna need it. I've tried it without it. Doesn't work. Just buy it. The last sensor you're going to need, which luckily already comes in the car, is a coolant temperature sensor. It is on the right side of the block if you're facing the front of the car. I'll show you where it is. Assuming yours already works, you don't need to buy it. The original wiring harness already has a pigtail for it, so you're good there unless yours is broken. Coolant temperature sensor, you're definitely gonna need one of those. One sensor I'm now just realizing that I forgot to mention is you're going to need a throttle position sensor. I got my throttle position sensor from a Volvo 850. It is a newer sensor. The reason is that it's potentiometer based as opposed to the original Volvo 240 sensors, which are like on-off switch based, I guess. You're going to need that potentiometer based TPS sensor. And then to mount the 850 Volvo sensor to the 240 intake manifold, there is a bracket from Yoshi Fab. It's $40. You can try to make your own bracket if you want, if you have a CNC machine or you feel like you can. I felt like I could, and then after looking at it for about 5 seconds, it's just much more convenient. Go buy that Yoshi Fab bracket to mount the 850 TPS to the Volvo 240 intake manifold. So that's more or less everything that you're gonna need to do this install. If I forgot anything, it will be in this video. I'm going to go over everything. I'm assuming that if you're doing this install, you're gonna watch the video all the way through anyways, because you're doing this install and it's got good information. So the next thing I'm gonna go over is kind of the first steps I took, because this is a big project. So I'm gonna go over the first things you're going to want to do, remove from the car to start wiring in your new ECU. So on the inside of the car, the first thing you're going to want to remove is your OEM ECU, which comes with the car. It'll be attached to this bracket and bolted, or screwed, I guess. One screw there, 2 screws there. There are going to be a few pigtails and plugs of OEM harness that go onto it. You're going to want to remove that ECU and just leave the wires dangling. They're going to go up to this grommet right here. Just kind of let them sit there. We're gonna remove them in a second. I'll show you how to do that from in the engine bay. It's much easier from there. But yeah, first step, remove your original ECU. I'll show you how we're gonna make this plate in a second to mount right back where the original ECU was, so you don't have to worry about any super crazy custom work that needs to be done. So with your ECU removed, the next step is going to be to remove your OEM wiring harness. Now your OEM wiring harness is going to come out of this grommet right here. I ended up removing the rubber. I have it somewhere just because it's going to be much easier to pull wires in and out of here, which you're going to be doing a lot with that grommet removed. So your OEM wiring harness runs about where you see all of these colored wires run under here up to the fuel injectors, under and down across there, and some go onto to the bottom of the car. Just remove the whole harness. It's much easier to do it that way. I highly recommend removing your air intake. Actually, you have to remove your air intake. There's no way to do this wiring otherwise. Remove your air intake off of your stock intake. Remove the fuel rail, pretty much everything in this area mechanically wise. Just take it out. It makes all the wiring so much easier. So once your original wiring harness is out, your ECU is out, your grommet is removed so you can move wires in and out, your intake manifold is off, your fuel rail is off, the throttle cable is off, pretty much everything in this area minus the distributor and anything down here, just all of that. Even your intake, I took off my air intake just for clearance reasons. You don't need to, you could leave it sitting there, but it's like 2 screws. Take out your air intake. Now we are ready to start kind of working on putting our ECU into the car and our new wiring harness into the car. What I'm going to do is go over what I did on the inside of the car with that plate, as I showed you before, and then I'll go over what wires go where and what sensors they go to, what's in the car, what you need to put into the car, and how to put it into the car. So the first thing I did before I started running any wires or doing anything of the sort is I built this little plexiglass board. Yours doesn't have to be plexiglass if you choose to go this route, but it could be any kind of plywood or OBS or whatever. But I built this plastic board that is literally just a rectangle, and I mounted my 2 relays, one right here, one right there. I just used like command tape or something. I screwed on my fuse block, and I screwed on my MICROSQUIRT ECU. I kind of just wanted the basis for this ECU to be all in the same spot. The original Volvo fuse block is over there. I didn't concern anything with this as it is a standalone ECU, and I want it to be completely separate from the rest of the car's wiring. So everything is on this plate, and as you can see, there's a hole there and a hole there. And what that allows me to do is actually mount this plate exactly where the OEM ECU was before for the engine. So it's a perfect spot to put it because you already took out your ECU, so you have space, and it fits. There's a lot of room there. There's a plastic covering that goes over it. So I highly recommend doing something like this to mount your ECU right up there. So once you have your ECU, fuse block, and relays mounted into the board, the rest of all that you see here, I know very chaotic, is pretty much just following this wiring diagram. I will leave it on the screen for a long time so you can always come back to it, but it is in the MICROSQUIRT V3 wiring diagram instruction manual. Make sure that when you are wiring your car, you go off of the MICROSQUIRT V3 manual. There is a V2 manual which I was looking at for the longest time, and when I went to start my car, a few of the wires were in the wrong spot because there is some slight variation and my car would not start, so I had to rewire a few things. Go off the V3. I will leave the link to the manual in the description. It is a long read. If you enjoy watching videos, that's why I'm kind of making this video. You can see everything a little bit easier compared to the manual, but go off that manual. Don't use the V2. Triple check that so you don't wire anything wrong. So the next major portion of this video is pretty much just going to be me showing you the wiring harness I just put on the screen. If you're good at reading wiring harnesses, copy paste that. Your car should start. It's really not that much more difficult than that. Crimp the connectors in the right spot, run the wires the right lengths. That's kind of it. I'm going to show it to you. I'm a much better learner if someone shows something to me, which is why I'm making this video. So if you're doing the ECU, you can see what I did, which for me helped a lot, and I'm assuming if you're a like person, will help you a lot. First thing you're going to want to wire in is a switched 12-volt source. You can get your switch 12 from pretty much anywhere. You're going to run it to 86, the 86 terminal on both of your relays, fuel and main. They both need a switch 12. You can run this to your key. You can run this to any other switch you want. I personally ran mine up to this switch right here. I wanted to have separate control of my ECU through the switch instead of through the key, so I could turn it off and on at any time in case I want to do some tuning and not drain my battery, whatever. The power for this switch is the glove box light right here. So I took the constant 12 from the glove box light and I ran it to this switch, and effectively making the whole system switched off of that. Again, you can run the switch 12 from anywhere. That's what I did, works for me. The next thing that you're going to want to wire is power directly from the battery. That's where I put these two together. I have one wire for each relay coming straight off the battery. I just ran it up, again, just like every other wire in the car. It comes up out of the grommet, runs under, across, and I ran the wire right to my positive battery terminal. You can see these are the two wires right there. Next, for the main relay, it's not that difficult. You have the switch 12, which goes to this, as I mentioned. You have the 12 volt from the battery, as I mentioned. There is a ground, which you'll see in the wiring diagram. I grounded mine right up to that bolt right there, which goes straight to the frame. And then the last terminal on your relay is going to run to your fuse block in 5 different locations. I have mine in 6. I intended on adding something extra. I never ended up doing so. So as you can see, there is no fuse and nothing that comes out of the back for this row right here. So I just did a little branchy guy. One plug from the relay sends power to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is going to be your injectors and a few other things. I'll show you that later. But just run 5 to your fuse block. That's all you need for your main relay. For the fuel pump relay, again, it is the switch 12, as I mentioned, the 12 volts from your battery, the purple fuel pump wire straight from your pigtail is going to go to one of the terminals, as you'll see in the wiring diagram. And then the last terminal, instead of doing a 5 branch off right here, it is a 2 branch off, and all that runs to is your fuel pump 12 volts and your O2 sensor. On the back side, so the 12 volts from your fuel pump relay needs to go to your fuel pump. And instead of fishing through trying to find that wire for your fuel pump, off of your original ECU, there should have been this plug. You'll see it in the car dangling. It has 4 wires. The yellow and red wire runs straight to your fuel pumps. So all you have to do, super simple, is run the 12 volts from your fuel pump relay through one of these 2 wires, split as I said before, and that goes, as you can see, I have it on this plug right here, and it runs straight to that black and red wire that I tapped into. That sends 12 volts to my fuel pump. Next thing, I'm gonna go over wiring in the inside of this car is the O2 sensor. The O2 sensor is very simple. As I said, I have this AEM air fuel ratio gauge and sensor. If you're using this exact same sensor, this wire goes straight to the inside of the engine bay into my O2 sensor. And then there are a few other wires for the O2 sensor. What matters is that in this O2 sensor kit, it will come off of this wire right here. All you're gonna wanna do is run 12 volts to the red wire, again, through one of these bottom 2. A ground, which I ran with the ground I mentioned before from the main relay. As you can see, that runs right up to the frame as well, to that yellow connector. And then the last one is this white wire, which just goes straight to the pink O2 wire off of your pigtail harness. And that goes to the white. The blue you do not need in this application. That is how you wire your O2 sensor. That is it. So we are now more or less done with what goes on the inside of the car. The next thing that I did is ran the entire pigtail harness minus the fuel pump and O2 sensor, which we've already wired to our board. I ran every wire through that grommet right there to the inside of my engine bay and just laid everything out off of the side of the engine, just kind of like the screen wires right now. I just kind of had everything hanging out like this. As I needed wires, I would fish them across. Since we've removed our original Volvo 240 wiring harness, what I ended up doing is pretty much harvesting every single plug from that harness. I just chopped off the connector plus maybe 3 inches of original wire so I could use the OEM plugs to my advantage. First thing I'm going to talk about wiring are the fuel injectors. So I harvested the original plugs. As I told you, this is one of the original Volvo plugs, and I left about 4 or 5 inches of the original Volvo wire. So you're going to run power 12 volts from your fuse block, one of the 5 connectors I mentioned before. They're going to use 2 of them. One is going to come up power. I just ran a red wire, remember, from the trailer wiring kit I mentioned before. I just used red wire from that. Red wire runs up, it goes to 2 of the fuel injectors, and then the ground for 2 of the fuel injectors runs through injector 1. It is the green wire off the pigtail, and it grounds at the ECU. The second set of injectors, you're going to run another 12 volt wire, as I said, from the fuse block off the back. It goes to the other 2 injectors, and then I think I just said it goes green. The second set goes to blue. It does not really matter, because when you set up the firing for this motor, it is set to spray all 4 fuel injectors at the same time, dispatch firing. So you do not need to worry about which 2 green ones will go where, which 2 blue ones go where. Doesn't matter. Next thing I want to talk about is ground for the ECU. The black wire off of the pigtail, I just ran it around, down, and up to here. This is where the OEM ECU grounds to the fuel rail bolt right here. So I just ran one of them, or I'm sorry, 2 of them. There are 2 grounds from the ECU. I just ran both of them right up here. This third one, I'll show you what it goes to later. I just needed a ground to the engine block, so I used all the same spot right there. So these 2 go from the ECU, ground them right there. Easy spot, very convenient. Run it with the rest of the wires under and up. Next thing I want to talk about wiring. This is the MAP sensor I was talking about before. If you want to run your MAP sensor, you're gonna have to do some research on your own. I did not use my MAP sensor. I used this GM 3-bar MAP sensor. For the power, the red wire right here, you're going to run the 5 volt VREF, which is a gray wire, I believe. Here it is right there. The gray wire, it's 5 volts. You're going to run that to your power. The ground, you're going to run to your sensor ground. And then the blue wire just runs to a wire in here, which is labeled MAP. I believe it is this green and red wire right here. That is your MAP sensor. That's all you got to do wiring for this guy. Next thing we're going to wire is our throttle position sensor. So as I mentioned before, it is right here on the side of your intake manifold. Assuming you have your intake manifold off, you can just screw it right on, super easy. You don't have to do it from this little side weird angle. This is the sensor right here. This is the bracket I told you to buy from Yoshi Fab. This is the intake manifold. You can see how it all sandwiches together. Off of the bottom of this, there are 3 wires. One is called TPS. It is labeled from your pigtail. Run the TPS wire to it. You are going to run the sensor ground to it, and you are going to run the 5 volt VREF just like the MAP sensor. So what you can actually do, because there's only one 5 volt VREF wire, is just tether them. So I have the 5 volt VREF running off my pigtail up to this one, up to the MAP sensor, and then it splits off and runs again to the TPS sensor. Same for the sensor ground. I believe every sensor I used in this engine is off the same sensor ground. It's just tethered from one to the next, to the next, to the next. Next sensor we're going to talk about wiring is the coolant temperature sensor. Now I cannot really show this to you. There's not a good angle for me to show this. It's under the intake manifold. It's literally just 2 wires. One of them is a sensor ground. One of them is labeled again from your pigtail. It is just the coolant temperature sensor wire. Run it to, it doesn't matter which order you do them in, because that's just how this sensor works. Doesn't matter if you run positive to negative, negative to positive, as long as the sensor ground wire goes to it, again tethered from the rest of them, and the coolant temperature sensor runs to it from the pigtail. Next sensor I want to talk about, this one I actually can show you because I don't have it put in the car at the moment. This is the intake air temperature sensor. You run the orange intake air temperature wire and the sensor ground. Again, this will plug into the sensor. I don't have it in the car at the moment, but those are the only 2 wires you need to run for the intake air temperature sensor. Next thing you're going to want to wire in is this Bosch module I was talking about before. This is for the ignition module. This wiring is super simple. I will put the wiring diagram up on the screen of how to wire this module in relation to your coil driver. It is not that difficult. There's a lot going on here, and it's one of those things where just following the diagram is going to be a lot easier. And then the last sensor that you're going to want to wire into your car is the Hall effect sensor and the gear for your RPM sensor. This is what I struggle with the most. I originally tried replacing my distributor, which you probably saw in the last video, for this little hall sensor. That didn't end up working for me. I wouldn't even try doing that. If you are thinking about trying it, I've already tried it. This is about I think it was like $60 for the whole thing. I definitely spent way more than $60 worth of time trying to figure out this distributor, so just do this the first time. The website tells you how to wire it. All you got to do is run 12 volts from my fuse block. I ran it from my fuse block, so the red wire runs up across with every other wire down to my fuse block, not a part of the pigtail. You're going to want to run a ground. I grounded mine to the bottom side of the engine, just to the oil pan bolt. And then the third is a sensor wire. The sensor wire runs to your VR1 green wire. So this is another complicated part of the build. With your harness, there are these VR thick gray wires. One of them is green, one of them is yellow, and they have this weird shield around them. All you're going to want to do, this is temporary, I just got the car running, so this is all going to be butt connectored and all nice, but you're going to want to run a wire from the sensor wire of your hall sensor. I just use green wire, again from the trailing wiring harness, to the green VR1 negative wire from this harness. You gotta strip back the gray, strip back the shielding, and then just cut the yellow. That's how you do the hall sensor. I couldn't figure this out for about a month, I would say. I don't know why no one could just simplify that on a forum. I'll go into a little bit more detail, but for the RPM reading, that's the wiring. Super simple. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to show you what I did for this gear and Hall effect sensor. This is probably the most complex part of the entire build. I had to remove the crankshaft pulley, and I mounted this gear on it using just 2 bolts that run all the way through to the back of the crankshaft pulley through little holes. And that is plenty strong enough to hold it on. It really is just spinning, doesn't take any force. The only thing I did have to do was cut out the center little hole to fit a socket around so I could get that bolt on and off. And then the only other thing I had to do was make this custom black bracket to hold the hall sensor in the proper position. I just used some sheet metal, cut it up, welded it at my shop class. If you don't have a welder, you might just have to get crafty. You can see where I ran the ground wire, but you might just have to get crafty figuring out how to mount this hall sensor. If you do it in this setup, I recommend doing this. It only took a couple days. If you have a welder, a weld shop will be able to do this for you probably in a couple hours for cheap. So I would, this isn't something that you can buy. I had to do it custom, so just runs off the 2 oil pan bolts right there. So yeah, this is how you're gonna want to set that up. And you can see the wires a little bit better under here. That's how I set that up. So the last 2 things I do want to mention that I forgot to throw in here, you will need to cut up this wiring harness, which runs along the whole side of the engine, not the engine harness, the one that runs to your windshield wiper motor and headlights. Right over here, you're going to want to cut into it a little bit so you can find this blue and yellow wire. That wire is going to have to run down to your starter, and I don't know how well I can show it. So as you can see, it's that red plug right down there. Right, let's see if I can put my finger. Right at the tip of my finger, there's a red plug which runs to the starter. That has to run up to this blue and yellow wire, so that way when you crank your car, it actually starts. And then secondly, there is a red wire in here, and that has to run to the D+ terminal on your alternator. If you don't know what the D+ terminal is, Google, or I can throw it on the screen, but Google alternator exciter wire for the 240. I have mine temporarily run because I haven't just run it up with the rest of the wires yet, but yeah, that red wire has to go to your alternator, otherwise it will not charge and you will not get a battery light on your dashboard. So that's pretty much it for this install. I probably forgot a bunch of things, and I just want to express to you, if there's anything you have a question about, go follow me, max._Jolley on Instagram. I will respond to every single DM that you guys send me on that account, max._Jolley. If you leave a comment on this video, I will also 100% respond. Even if you're watching this video months down the line, hopefully, I don't know about years, but I'll try. I'll try to respond as many comments as I can. This is hard. I was able to get this running mostly because of another YouTuber by the name of Brandon Carlson. He helped me so much wiring this thing all together. But yeah, if you have any questions, DM me, leave a comment. I will respond. I will try to help you to the best of my ability. Yeah. But yeah, guys, that's going to be a wrap for this video. I hope you guys appreciated it if you're trying to do a MICROSQUIRT ECU install on your 240 as well. I'm going to have more videos coming out with this car soon. I would say ballpark, this whole project took me about 3 to 4 months, but that's mostly because I didn't have most of the information that was in this video. And I'm a student, so I've had other things going on. If you are start to finish doing this, I would allot yourself 2 weeks. Assuming you already have all the parts and you have a basis of what's going on, you could probably knock this out in 2 weeks. So this is going to be a project, and that's completely aside from tuning and setting all that up. So just for doing the wiring and stuff, if you're a normal person that works a 9 to 5 and just is working after school or just your job, whatever, 2 weeks. And then it probably cost me about $800 to $1,000 to do the full harness and the full ECU setup for everything in this car. So I appreciate you guys sitting to the end. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff. Follow me on Instagram. I will respond to any questions. I really hope this is a inclusive enough video for you to get this started. All of this information I had to piece together from forums from 5 years ago and random YouTube videos. So peace out. I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.